So batching artwork is the process of creating a batch of art. And it can be used for fine art, or it can be used for just exploring and tinkering around. You can use any medium and any size piece. Here are just little small cards that I made with the batching process. Now, to make this batching process work so effectively, I tend to use the same materials. You can vary that as you like. But I start out with the same materials. In this case, I started out with a watercolor and I just made leaves. And I just kind of explored doing that. So here's my first example. I continued to make leaves on all the little cards, and then from there I embellished it. The next layer that I went to was a pen, and I outlined each of them. I used dots, dashes, and some I didn't outline. And this was the whole process of playing with it. It's just really exploring. So after I finished my outlining, I then went in with some colored pencils. And then I just added a little bit of color, a little depth. So I took my darkest color and I'd maybe go to the edge of the leaves, adding a little shadowing, taking my lightest color, same thing, just adding a little bit of interest. There was no rhyme or reason, I was just exploring. So then I had all these cards with the leaves and the tones and the values, and I decided, well, I'll bring in some washi tape. And I included that in most of them. Not this one, I wanted to leave one plain, just to see my kind of evolution here with the cards. As I mentioned, you can use this with any medium, and that's what makes batching artwork exciting. Batching artwork gives you a chance to explore either a technique, a medium, a color, a tool, anything that you'd like. You can paint giant canvases, and perhaps the batching process, instead of taking an afternoon, might take months. And that's totally acceptable. The idea is that it's an efficient way to create art where you're not thinking so much about the end result, just the process. And by creating a batch where you have a number of them, you can explore things. Some things might work out, some things might not. But when you're done, you have a set of artwork that you can go through and learn from. I'll show you another example at the end, again with slightly different materials. But today we're going to create a batch of artwork, and I'll talk you through the process. So for this process, I'm going to make a small series of cards that I'm going to use as ephemera for my journals. You can, again, use any type of medium you like. I'm going to make this a little different than usual. I'm just taking this coloring book that I have here, uncolored, and I'm going to use those pages as my background. So the first thing I'll do is cut these pages to size that I want to use in my project. And I can make any from 3 to 100. It's really up to you what size and quantity you want to create. So here I have 8 cards cut to 4 by 3 inches, and they're just the background of that coloring book page. I also chose 2 pieces of paper to add a little collage to these. Just a little bit is what I want to do. This is origami paper. I could use either side, but I think I'm going to stick with that blue side. And then I have this craft paper. So now I can set all my pieces out and create the collage. It's my first layer on the piece, and I can decide if I want to do a different layer, if I wanted to do paint first, or marker, or drawing, or scribbles, or anything of that nature. So I'll set out my pieces, and then I can start making the collage. So I flipped over the pieces, deciding which side I wanted to be the top of it. And now I'll just take my pieces of paper and tear them up to use as I want in the collage. And I think I'll start with this beige. So now I have some materials. I just start to play. No rhyme or reason. Whatever I like. And that's the beauty of collage, is it's really up to you. But again, use whatever medium you prefer for that first layer. And you don't have to include multiple layers, but you certainly can. So here I have my collage elements laid down. I can still alter them if I want, but I want to attach them at this phase. I'm kind of happy with the way they look. Anything that goes off the page, I have the option of leaving or cutting off. So after I adhere it down, I'll take a peek and see what I want to do there. I have some matte medium and a brush, and now I'll just go about adhering this down. So now I have all the collage attached. Kind of interesting pieces here. Again, I think this is a little bright, the blue, for the look I'm going for. Before I get started though, I have to make a decision if I want to cut the edges off, and I do. And that is entirely my mood. Today's mood is I want just crisp edges. So now the edges are the way I want. My next layer, again, every layer is optional, is I'm going to take a little of this plaster color paint, which is just barely off-white. Take just a little bit, and I just want to diffuse a little bit of that blue. It's just a little brighter than I want. I still like that effect. I still like that hint of color, but it's still a little much for me, particularly for this project. So I'll go around diffusing that blue. So you can see how that diffused it just a little bit. I still have the blue peeking through. The next stage is to add another layer, and I'm just going to add some scribbles. I don't know how this will go. It might not be the result that I want, but I'm just going to take a marker with my non-dominant hand. I'm going to hold this down and just create some marks. I don't want a lot of them. I'm just looking to add something to the background. It's very white on the paper, and I want to change that up a little. By using my non-dominant hand, I don't find myself creating particular shapes, just marks, really. And again, I'll go off the paper at times. So now I have lots of layers going. I want to add more. I love working with acrylic paints and stencils. So here I have 3 stencils that I chose. Now, this is a larger stencil that I cut down to this size. As you can see, the stencil has a lot of large openings, so I call this my large stencil. I have a letter stencil here with much fewer openings, and then a tiny stencil here. I'm going to use a sponge to apply my paint, and again, I'll go to each one, starting with that batch process. I'm going to start with my largest stencil and a sponge. So I have some flat gray paint here, my palette. I'm going to dip my sponge so it's not saturated, just slightly damp with paint. And now I'm just going to sponge very lightly, just different areas onto my pages here. Do one by one. So I have the first layer with different degrees of coverage, and I love how it just covers all the different layers underneath. Some are exposed, it's transparent. There's just a lot going on. I really enjoy this process. And this one I tried to fill it in with most of that stencil covering this piece. Here I did a little less, and that's the exploration process. I'm like, oh, what if this happens? Let me try this. I'll continue this process with my next layer, which is going to be these alphabet stencils and a little bit of blue. And it's the same process. I dip my sponge in the paint, and I'll just add a little bit here and there to my piece. It's a subtle effect, and I'm sticking with my neutral colors. So I'm starting to cover more and more of that paper. I want to add a little bit of pop of color. So I'm going to use a little white paint this time and create just a little hint of this pattern here. Again, put on my stencil and go to town. So here I have the results of my batched artwork. I have these beautiful little cards now, a set of them. I can do something on the back, or I can add quotes to the front, or just leave it to use in future work. I found the whole process of working with limited materials and just exploring very freeing. Let me show you one more variation. So with this batch, I used watercolor paper. I started out taping off a piece of watercolor paper into sections, just using washi tape, and I just went with the flow. The thickness of the washing tape dictated it. And from there, I painted rectangles of 3 different colors, a purple, a very bright pink, and a muted pink. And then in order to make them cohesive, I painted another layer on top of it, like a neon pink. And I let it dry. After it was dry, I started adding my layers. I used marker and some gel pen. And then I went around the edge with just some gold marker. So they're really quite lovely pieces. And again, it was a fun process, and I do have something I can use in my journals. So the purpose of batching artwork is freeing. It allows you to explore topics, play with your art, and create beautiful results. There's no pressure. You're using materials and you're focusing on just playing. It takes the emotional pressure off of creating artwork because you're limiting yourself to materials. And by doing that, you focus just on the process. And because you're making so many, your mind kind of shuts off and realizes it's a numbers game. You might make 8 pieces and you might only like a few of them, but chances are you're going to like quite a few of them. And it's a great way to explore concepts and materials. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And thank you for joining me today.